Well, a tale of two coasts. As we get ready to say farewell to 2023, we want to take the economic pulse on the nation, looking at the East Coast and West Coast. Now, today we're tapping into the state of EV charging infrastructure. Now, the West is leading the charge in this effort, with California, of course, taking the top spot with the most charging ports in the US. And it isn't even close. New York takes the second spot, but California has more than triple the amount of charging ports that New York does. So why does the huge gap in EV infrastructure across the country exist? Well, we have Matt Petersen, LACI CEO and President, to discuss this with us. Good to have you on the show here. So it's interesting, as we look at infrastructure charging, it makes sense in the state of California. But New York, where we predominantly don't see people driving as much, more congested cities, it's interesting to see that as taking that second spot. What should we need to know about the dichotomy between the two?
Well, California, pursuant to your previous conversation, California has been the early adopter for EVs. So we needed to invest in the charging infrastructure, and we've seen that accelerate. In Los Angeles alone, we have over 20,000 chargers in the city that are there for electric vehicles. We just, have seen the sales of cars of EVs in California eclipse 25% across the state. So, they're about 7.9% in the third quarter of this last year across the country. So people need the charging. We've seen that early investment. We've seen things like Electrify America, EVgo, others really begin to invest here. Other companies, like Shell Recharge has really been investing a lot of, some of the majors, oil companies have invested as well as BP. And amply, we're seeing this infrastructure be deployed, and it's only accelerating in its pace.
Matt, we're both EV drivers, and you've heard me make this complaint before. If you're not part of the Tesla network, doesn't matter how many chargers there are in LA, it's still a very frustrating experience because there's so many chargers that are not working. Why has reliability been such an issue? And what are the lessons that maybe other states can take away from what we have seen roll out in California?
Yeah. So when a charger gets installed, of course, there's a safety standard that's used for the electrical components in the connection to the utility grid, the distribution system. That's really important. But one of the things people don't think about is when a charger doesn't work 80% to 90% of the time, it's a non-electrical issue. It's a software issue. It's a firmware issue. It's a Wi-Fi connection. It's, the data logger isn't connecting and therefore the system shuts down. So, Elon and Tesla have really perfected their model. At the same time, they want to make sure they have uptime. So it's really critical that all chargers have uptime. But you've seen the move to using the North American Charging Standard, or NACS, that Tesla's pioneered from CCS, which is the predominant charging infrastructure that's been in place before. But per our last conversation, we need to see more uptime of chargers. That's why statewide in California and federally, the commitment is 97% uptime, which is, we're seeing in some markets 30 to 40% of the time some of the chargers are down. And how do we do that? We need to make sure we've got folks that are diagnosing and ensuring that if it's an internet connection or a software upgrade that needs to happen, that it's done proactively, preemptively, that we're anticipating these challenges. And so that's why a company like Charger Help, started by Yvette Ellis and Camille Terry, two Black women from South LA, that are out there building a workforce across the country and a software platform using the data to create predictive analytics to really fix these chargers ahead of time and make sure there's uptime for when you show up, it's going to work.
And Matt, obviously California, as you mentioned, they're ahead of the game when it comes to adopting this. But when it comes to, say, some of the states on the East Coast and the public-private partnerships, how key is that going to be to really selling that point when it comes to some of these states?
Well, you're going to see an acceleration of charging infrastructure installation as the federal money from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as well as the incentives for vehicles in the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as also upgrades that are part of the Inflation Reduction Act. You can get if you want to put a charger in your home, you might have to do a panel upgrade. You can have most of those upgrades will be eligible for a 30% tax credit from the federal government now, along with the charging infrastructure. The solar system, if you want to put in a solar system and battery storage. So we're going to see this money really begin to work its way through, meaning that we're going to see these chargers in more and more places. In the state plans from the $5 billion in charging that were made available to the states for infrastructure, for charging infrastructure, primarily along freeways and highways, that's making its way. So we're going to see a surge in charging infrastructure in the East Coast, the Southeast, middle of America. It's not just going to be the coasts that are going to see charging infrastructure. And as we see more people get excited, and once you're in an EV, you never want to go back. If you pass up a gas station, it's a phenomenal experience. And it's a phenomenal experience to drive an EV, let alone the environmental benefits, the lack of a tailpipe, and all the other attributes that help fight the climate crisis that comes with driving an EV.
Matt, it feels like we've sort of seen the first wave of adoption with the early adopters obviously willing to shell out maybe a little extra money because of that very point you made about cleaner cars. But real mass adoption is only going to happen with cars that are more affordable and also access to the chargers. We have seen that it's not often equal. It's more of the affluent neighborhoods that get the chargers in place. As we look to this next phase, do you feel like that's being addressed more? And to what extent are those credits, those subsidies you just mentioned, key to making sure that the charger distribution is more equal?
Yeah, you're going to see more charging infrastructure investment in what is known as disadvantaged communities, lower income neighborhoods that are predominantly Black and brown populations that lack access to chargers. And sort of when you look at early adopters, so you saw the charging go where the early adopters may live or go to work or go to shop, we're going to see that begin to come into other neighborhoods. And who are the pioneers in driving electric vehicles are the TNC drivers, people who drive for Uber and Lyft. We need to get charging infrastructure in place in the neighborhoods they live. So one of the things we're doing and we're seeing more of is how do we put fast charging for that opportunity charge? Because if you're just a regular EV driver, you really don't need a fast charge unless you're on a long trip or you don't have a charger available to you. But we're seeing more penetration into multi-unit dwellings, our apartment buildings. In Los Angeles, there's been over 20,000 chargers across the county installed in apartment buildings alone, and that's going to go up. If you own a home, you can plug into the wall, which is what I do in my house. But you also want to make sure that charging is at workplace, if you're going to the office or where you shop. So, we're starting by really seeing how we get those early adopters the charging they need. More and more people, if you use an Uber or a Lyft, you're seeing more and more EV drivers, whether it's a Tesla or a Nissan or a Chevy or, for other higher end vehicles sometimes in the mix, if you're using the black option, if you're available to do that. And so we're really seeing that begin to drive penetration of charging. And so it's why we've supported legislation federally and statewide to not only put EV car share in low-income neighborhoods at public housing, but add in additional grants with the other incentives to put fast charging in neighborhoods where the public housing is located, which are predominantly low-income disadvantaged communities. How do we get that charging infrastructure where it's needed next?
You raise a good point about the green option when you take an Uber. I always take it. It's my way of sort of by way of sort of test driving an EV. But I did get to test drive an EV when I had a rental car. It really did change my mind. I'm definitely more sold than I was before. So that user experience is certainly going to be key. Appreciate you joining us this morning, Matt Petersen, LACI President and CEO. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.